Good afternoon, Veritas All-Stars. It is the lesson for April 24th, Friday, April 24th, 2020. Last part of the day. We're almost ready for our weekend after a nice short week. So here we go. We'll get right into this All-Star problem from today, Friday, April 24th, 2020. It's about 4 different students eating pizza. So get this one ready. Pause if you need a second, and then we're going to begin with this problem. Okay, so first time through, I'm just going to read it. I'm just going to try to soak in as much of it in my brain as I can. Jacob ate 4/5 of a large Domino's pizza for lunch. Delilah ate 0.76 or 76 hundredths of a large Domino's pizza for dinner. Josue ate 3/4 of a large Domino's pizza for lunch the next day. Christopher ate 8 times 1/10 plus 3 times 1/100th of a large Domino's pizza for dinner the next night. Part A says, using the students' names, order the amount of pizza that each person ate from greatest to least. Then part B says, using the standard decimal form for each amount, order them from least to greatest. Okay, and that one doesn't tell you that you have to use, it doesn't tell you to use the students' names. So part A wants you to use the students' names. Part B wants you to use the standard decimal form for each amount. All right, so we got to just be real careful, and after we give our answers, we're going to read it and make sure that we did the things that they wanted us to do. Okay, so let's go back to the problem now. Jacob ate 4/5 of a large pizza. So what I noticed the first time through is they all ate a decimal or a fraction of a large pizza. So the whole is the same for all 4 of them because it was a large Domino's pizza for all 4 of them. Okay. So over here, I got my workspace. I already started organizing this. I got my 4 people, Jacob, Delilah, Josue, and Christopher. Jacob ate 4/5. Delilah ate 76 hundredths. Josue ate 3/4. And Christopher ate 8/10 plus 3/100. So 8 times 1/10 would be an 8 in the 10ths place, right after the decimal point. And 3 times 1/100 would be 3 in the 100ths place. So Christopher's as a decimal in decimal form is written as 0.83. So if you didn't get that, be careful with this. That's 8 times 1/10 or 8/10. So an 8 in the 10th place. And then 3 times 1/100 would be a 3 in the 100ths place or 0.83. Okay. So part A, we got to remember to use the students' names. Can't forget that. So I'm going to really underline it to make sure that I don't forget that. Order the amount of pizza each person ate from greatest to least. So to help myself make sure that I don't put it in the wrong order, I put greatest to least. And I put 4 spaces for the 4 kids' names. Can't forget that. Okay. Part B said, using the standard decimal form for each amount, so we're going to write them in the standard decimal form. Order them from least to greatest. So I got myself set up here. I know how exciting it can be once you find out the answers and which ones are bigger than the others, so you got to be extra careful, and this is a strategy that I use, least to greatest. I already set it up so that I know to write them in the correct order. So we're going to write the names for part A from greatest to the least, and we're going to write the decimal from least to greatest for part B. Okay? So here we go. Let's get started. 2 of them are decimals, so we can already tell that Delilah ate less than Christopher. He ate 83 hundredths, and Delilah ate 76 hundredths. Okay? But we got to figure out, what about 4/5? How do you write that as a decimal? And 3/4, how do you write that as a decimal? Okay? So in this situation, I made it a little easier for the first time we do this. 5 can multiply to get to 100, and 4 can also multiply to get to 100. So if we just turn these into hundredths, then we can easily figure out how many hundredths is that compared to 76 hundredths or 83 hundredths. But I'm just going to give you a little bit of a preview. If this wasn't a number that multiplied to get to 100, it would be a little bit harder. If this was 8, for example, 8 doesn't multiply to get to 100. So that's going to make it a lot harder to decide what this is as a decimal. And I'll show you how to divide. You could just do 4 divided by 5. I'll do one example of that. Okay? So 5 times 20 is 100. If you count by 20 5 times, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. So 5 times 20 is 100, so we're going to multiply 4 times the same number times 20. That way we really multiplied 4/5 times 20 20ths, which equals 1. So 4 times 20 is 80 hundredths. And we write that as 0.80, landing in the hundredths place. So Jacob ate 80 hundredths, Delilah ate 76 hundredths. We don't know about Josue yet, and Christopher ate 83 hundredths. Charlie is having a blast. That's why he's making all that noise. Charlie, that's JoJo's hat. Put that down. Sorry about all that. Okay, now we're going to try to figure out Josue, 3/4. How many hundredths is that? So 4 times 25 gets you to 100. Right? If you had 4 quarters, you'd have $1. 4 times 25 got us to 100, so we're going to do 3 times the same number, 3 times 25. That way we really multiplied 3/4 times 25 25ths, which 25 25ths is equal to 1. So we're just multiplying it times 1. We're not really changing the value. So 4 times 25 got us to 100. 3 times 25 is 75 hundredths, which we write as 0.75. 75, that's the tenths place. That is the hundredths place. So now we got them all written as decimals. Part A says, using the students' names, order the amount of pizza that each person ate from greatest to least. So names, greatest to least. So let's see, the greatest would be 0.83. That would be Christopher. So Christopher is the greatest. Then after that, we have 0.75, 0.76, or 0.80. The next one is Jacob, from greatest to least. So the next greatest, right, or the one that's just smaller than that, would be Jacob. So the second name needs to be Jacob. Then we have 76 hundredths or 75 hundredths from greatest to least. The next one would be Delilah. I know my lines here, I didn't give much space. And then last but not least, the smallest number from greatest to least. We went from Christopher to Jacob to Delilah, and now at 0.75 is Josue. Okay, so that's the order that they need to go in. Christopher, I'll rewrite him over here. And then we have Jacob. Then we have Delilah. And then we have Josue. And that's my final answer from greatest to least using their names. So be really careful. If you put a fraction or a decimal here, your answer would be marked wrong because it tells you to use the students' names from greatest to least. We did that. I wrote myself a couple of strategies. I used a few strategies to make sure that I did all of what it asked me to do. Christopher, Jacob, Delilah, and Josue from greatest to least. Now, part B, using standard decimal form. So standard form of using a decimal. That's just like we wrote it here, just as a standard form decimal. Charlie, no. No. That's JoJo's beautiful hat. You're going to ruin it. Come on here. Come on. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so this one, we're going from least to greatest. So we already have the work done. If it was greatest to least here, now we're just going to go least to greatest. But instead of using their names, we're going to put their answers. So least would be 0.75. Then it was 0.76. Then it was 0.80. And the biggest one was 0.83. So 75 hundredths, 76 hundredths, 80 hundredths, and 83 hundredths. They go from least to greatest. And we wrote it as standard decimal form. So the answer here is 0.75, 0.76, 0.80, and 0.83. That is the answer to part B. If you have the person's names, people's names, then you are incorrect because it tells you to write it in standard decimal form. Least to greatest, we did least to greatest. This one, students' names, greatest to least, we did that, and we are all done with this problem. Give yourself some snaps. Nice work. Okay, one other thing that I said I was going to show you is, for example, let's take Jacob's 4/5. if this was a different number, like 3/8, you can't do 8 times anything to get to 100. This one worked out because 5 multiplies to get to 100, and this one worked out 3/4 because 4 multiplies to get to 100. So what would you do if it didn't multiply to get to 100? This one does, but I'm going to show you what I would do if it didn't, and I couldn't just multiply to 100 and make it hundredths, because sometimes it's just not that easy. So this is 4/5, or 4 divided by 5. So I'm going to give myself lots of space in the back. We're doing 4 divided by 5. 4 is being divided into 5 groups. So of course, if we had 5 groups, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 groups, I only have 4, so I can't put 1 into each group, because then this group wouldn't have any, and they wouldn't be equal groups. It'd be 1 in each of these 4 groups, but then this one would have 0, and they would not be equal groups. So we can't do that. So we have to find out what decimal can we put into each group. Okay? So you can write 4 as 4 and 0/10, because that's the same thing as 4. And you can also write it as 4 and 0/10 and 0/100, because 4.00 is the same as 4 ones. There are no tenths, there are no hundredths. So we can put our decimal place right here. And even though 5 doesn't go into 4, like we said, we can't put any 1s into each of these because we only have 4. So there are no 1s that will work. So let's see how many tenths we can put. So what we're going to do here is look at it as 40 tenths, because it is. 40 goes to the tenths place. So how many tenths, if you had 5 groups, if you had 40 tenths altogether, how many can you put into each group? It's 8, because 8 times 5 is 40. So 8 tenths times 5 is 40 tenths. Then you subtract, and that was all of the tenths. We put, so far, 8 tenths into each of these groups. Okay? Now let's bring down the hundredths. We have 0 hundredths left. So what times 5 gets you to 0? There's no hundredths left, so we have no hundredths to put in these groups, so we're not going to put any in each group. 0 times 5 is 0, and there's no remainder. So our answer is 0.80, or 80 hundredths. So 80 hundredths times 5 should get us to 4. 0.80 times 5, I'm just checking my work. 5 times 0, 5 times 8 is 40. So 80 times 5 is 400, but since it's 0.80, that means we have 2 digits behind the decimal point, so we need to make it so our answer also has 2 digits behind the decimal point. And just like 4 divided by 5 equals 80 hundredths, 80 hundredths times 5 gets us to 4. So we just checked our answer, and we know that that is correct. Okay, and that was 80 hundredths was the same thing we got when we did it by turning it into hundredths. Okay, so if you ever get to a point like if we had 3/8, how do you write that as a decimal? You can't just multiply to get this to 100. You can't do that, because there's nothing times 8 that gets you to 100. Can't do it. So instead, you're going to divide. 3 divided by 8, just like we did over here, and that would tell you as a decimal how you could write it. All right, so good job. Give yourself some snaps. Nice work today. Charlie's finally calmed down, and I hope everybody has a great day. Have a nice weekend. See you on Monday. Thanks, everyone.